The corner table at Galloway's Diner in Galion, Ohio, had been set for 8 since morning. 8 cloth napkins folded into fans the way his wife had always done them. 8 water glasses. A small yellow birthday cake in the center with 1 candle burned all the way down, and 7 chairs that had not moved since he pulled them out. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. Sergeant Dario Cruz had come in off Route 30 with his canine Teddy for a late lunch on his way back from the hospital. And Teddy had stopped in the doorway and had not moved toward the empty tables the way he always moved toward empty tables. He had moved toward the corner. He had sat down beside the old man at the head of the table with the focused, decided quality of a dog that has made an assessment and is waiting for the human to catch up. The old man was looking at the door. He had been looking at the door for some time, from the specific quality of his stillness, the stillness of someone who is watching for something and has decided not to stop watching yet. He was 82 years old. He had set this table himself and made the cake himself, and he had been alone at it since noon. And what the Marine did next, quietly, without announcing it, without making it into something the old man would have to manage, was what this diner was still talking about 6 months later. If you haven't found this channel yet, subscribe. This is the kind of story we tell here. Dario was 36 and had been a Marine for 12 years and had spent that morning in a hospital in Columbus sitting beside his father's bed. His father had had a small stroke 3 days ago. Not catastrophic, the doctors said he would likely recover most of what he'd lost, but the word likely was a word Dario had been turning over since the call came in. He had driven 5 hours because he did not want to be the person who didn't come, which was a feeling that had lodged in him somewhere between Columbus and Route 30. And had not left. His father was 70 years old. He was not going to be 82, but he might be. And Dario had sat beside his bed and held his hand and had not said most of what he was thinking, which was about time and distance and the specific debt that a son who chose a life far from home accumulates without always knowing it. He had stopped in Galion because his coffee had run out and his hands needed something to do, and he had walked into Galloway's Diner with Teddy and had seen the corner table. And Teddy had already understood before Dario had looked long enough to understand. Teddy was 5 years old, a Belgian Malinois, tawny with a black face and the expressive eyes of a dog who is visibly communicating what he thinks at all times, and is not apologetic about it. He had served 2 deployments and had come back with Dario, and had been with him ever since, riding in the passenger seat on the long drives, sleeping at the foot of whatever bed Dario was sleeping in, and reading rooms with the specific accuracy of a working dog whose job has always been to tell a human something the human should already know. He did not wait for assessment. He went where the situation required and sat there, and his judgment had been wrong exactly once in 5 years, and that had been about a cat, and Dario had forgiven him. Walter Gruber had been 82 for approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes when Dario walked into the diner, and he had been expecting people at his table since noon, and noon had become 1 o'clock, and 1 o'clock had become 2 o'clock, and the food in the carriers was still warm, but would not be warm much longer. He had made Pearl's yellow cake, which had taken him the better part of Tuesday morning, and which was the same recipe Pearl had made for every birthday in their family for 50 years. White flour, the specific ratio of vanilla to lemon that Pearl had worked out in 1967 and had never written down because she had believed some things should live in the hands rather than on paper. He had written it down when she died in the margins of a recipe card for something else, because he understood that if he did not write it down, it would leave when he left, and he was not ready for that. The cake was imperfect in the way of a thing made by someone still learning how to do it alone. He had set 8 places because Karen and her husband had said they would try to come, and Dan and his wife had said the same, and he had set places for all of them and for himself, and for Pearl's chair at the end of the table that he always left set even when she was not there to sit in it. Pearl had died 4 years ago, in November, which was why November birthdays had a specific quality now. He had run the parts counter at the Galion steel plant for 38 years, had known the name of every part and every machine in that plant, and had been able to find anything in the warehouse by memory alone, which had made him the person everyone called at 8 in the morning when something had broken and the line was down. He had married Pearl Hoffman in 1964, and had raised 4 children in the house on Maple Street, and had coached Little League for 11 years, and had served on the deacon board at First Lutheran for 20, and there was not a family in Galion that didn't know his name in one context or another. His children had grown up and scattered. Karen 40 minutes away in Fostoria, Richard in Phoenix, Dan in Columbus, Lois in Pittsburgh, and Pearl had managed the distances the way she managed everything, with the specific warm efficiency of a woman who understood that love required maintenance and had done the maintenance cheerfully for 50 years. After Pearl died, the maintenance had not been done as well. Things had drifted in the way that things drift when the person who held the center is gone. There had been a dispute about Pearl's jewelry, a small thing made larger by grievances that had been waiting for a container. Karen's husband Gary had said things, and Walt had been in the middle of it and had said less than he should have said, which was his habit, and the drift had continued until it was no longer drift but distance. 3 years. Karen had not come to last year's birthday or the year before. This year, he had sent the card and she had written back and said they would try. He had made Pearl's cake and set the table for 8, and he had believed her, which was the thing about Walt. He went on believing people because he had built a life on the premise that people were worth believing, and he was not going to revise that premise at 82. He had been watching the door since noon. Have you ever known someone like Walt? Someone who set a table and kept watching the door, who went on believing past the point where believing was easy. If that person is still reachable, this might be the day to call. If they're not, type their name below. Teddy was beside the chair before Dario had made a decision. Dario stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the table, the 8 settings, the blown-out candle, the 2 casserole carriers still warm from the oven, the old man who was looking at the door and had turned slightly when Teddy approached. The old man looked at the dog and then looked at Dario, and his face had the expression of someone who has been composed for 3 hours and is encountering, unexpectedly, the possibility that composure might not be required. Dario said, "Is this seat taken?" He said it lightly, the way you say something when you want to leave a door open for the other person to close if they need to. Walt looked at the chair Dario had put his hand on. He looked at Teddy, who was sitting beside the chair and whose tail was moving at the measured, specific pace of a dog that is not performing happiness but is genuinely present. He said, "No." Dario pulled up the chair. He did it quietly the way the title says, not with announcement, not with the specific kindness that makes its own recipient feel like a project. He sat down because there was a chair and a man alone at a table, and his dog had already made the decision for both of them. Walt looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "There's food enough." "I can see that," Dario said. Walt said, "It keeps warm in those carriers." "Then we should eat before it doesn't," Dario said. Walt looked at the door one more time. Then he looked at the table. Then he started serving. They ate. Pearl's casserole, which was the green bean kind with the fried onions on top, and which was apparently the only thing Walt's grandson Marcus would eat without complaint, though Marcus was not here. The other carrier had ham and scalloped potatoes. There was rolls from the bakery on Oak Street. There was the yellow cake. Between the casserole and the ham, Dario noticed the army cap on the table beside the cake, an old service cap, the kind that belonged to a specific era. He asked about the regiment number on the badge. Walt said, "Korea, 7th Infantry." Dario said, "My grandfather was 7th Infantry, different regiment, same division." He said the division number. Walt looked at him. 1951, Dario said. He was 19. He came home and never talked about it much, but he kept the patch. Walt was quiet for a moment. He had talked about it some, over the years, not the specific things, but the general weather of the place, the cold that had no ceiling, the sound of the river in winter, the specific quality of sky over the peninsula on clear days, which was a blue that didn't exist anywhere else in his experience. He had talked about it with Pearl, who had known how to listen without needing him to explain what he wasn't saying. He said, "Your grandfather made it back." "He died in 2019, Dario said. "At 88, in his own house." Walt nodded. There was something in his face that was not grief, exactly. More like recognition. The accounting of men who had gone to the same place and come home to different quantities of time. Dario said, "He would have been 88 this past March. My dad called and we sang on the phone." He paused. He didn't do the birthday big, but we called. He said it without emphasis, but Walt heard the shape of it, the thing Dario was telling him without telling him. Walt cut the cake. He cut 8 pieces, which was perhaps optimistic, and plated 2 of them and left the rest on the stand. He put 1 in front of Dario and 1 at his own place, and sat down. He said, Pearl made this recipe for 50 years. Dario said, what was her name? Walt told him. He told him her maiden name and the year they married and where she had grown up. He told him about the recipe card, the margins, the handwriting, the way he had needed to do 3 batches before he had it close. He said, it's not exactly right, but it's close. Dario ate a piece of the cake. He said, it's good. Walt said, it's close. The afternoon had moved to 3:30. The light through the diner windows had the specific low November quality that makes Ohio feel like the end of something and the beginning of something else at the same time. The server, a woman named Donna who had been Walt's server every Sunday for 12 years, had stopped by the table twice and had not said anything unnecessary. The other tables in the diner had become aware of the situation in the way that small diners become aware of things, not intrusively, but fully. Teddy had moved from beside the chair to under the table, his weight against Walt's feet, which was the specific soulful mode of a dog who has decided where he is supposed to be and has settled there. Walt's phone was on the table. It had not buzzed. At some point, between the cake and the coffee Donna brought without being asked, Dario said, did you think they were coming? He said, Karen said they would try. He said it in the specific voice of a man who has been saying something for a long time and can hear, in the saying of it, the weight it has accumulated. He said, she hasn't come the last 2 years, but she said she would try. Dario said, what happened 2 years ago? He said, her husband has some ideas about the house, about what I should do with it. I don't agree with his ideas. Dario nodded. He did not ask the follow-up question. Because he had learned in 12 years of service and 14 months of the Resource Center in San Antonio, and a specific education of sitting with people who were carrying things, that the follow-up question was sometimes the thing that made people stop. He let the information sit in the space where it was sitting, and he waited. Walt said, Gary told her I wanted it quiet this year. He said it quietly. Matter-of-factly, the way he said things, he said I sent a message. I didn't send any message. He looked at the 8 settings. I sent birthday cards. If you were Gary Mercer and you walked through that door at 4 in the afternoon, knowing what was on that table, knowing who was sitting at it, what would you have said? Type it below. I read every comment. The Facebook post went up at 3:45. Donna's daughter had come in for a to-go order and had taken a photograph from the counter, the table for 8, the birthday cake, the Marine and the dog and the old man with 2 pieces of cake on their plates and coffee steaming in front of them, and the 7 empty chairs, and had posted it to the Galleon community page with a caption that said simply, Happy birthday, Walt. By 4 o'clock, it had 47 reactions. Gary Mercer arrived at 4:17. He was 57, a large man in a fleece vest, with the particular manner of someone who has been in charge of small things for a long time and has extrapolated from this that he is in charge of large things. He came through the door of Galloway's with the walk of a man who has been sent to manage a situation by his wife and has decided to make it look like his own initiative. He had seen the photograph. He recognized Walt in it and had told Karen he would go check on Dad, which was the appropriate thing to do, which was also what he was doing. He saw Dario at the table and recalibrated slightly. Teddy came out from under the table. He did not bark. He placed himself between Gary and Walt with the specific wait-forward position of a dog that has concluded an assessment and is not interested in revising it, and the sound from his chest was the low, continuous register of a dog that is not alarmed but has made its position clear. Gary looked at the dog. He said, Walt, hey, Karen wanted me to check in. He looked at Dario. I don't believe we've met. Dario Cruz, Dario said. Gary Mercer, Karen's husband. He looked back at Walt. Quite a spread. Looks like you had a good birthday. He said, he told her not to come. He said it to Dario, quietly, not as an accusation fired at Gary, as a statement of what was true, placed in the room for the first time. Donna, refilling the coffee at the counter, did not move. The 2 men at the table by the window looked up. Gary said, Walt, I don't know what you think He told Karen I wanted it quiet, Walt said. I didn't want it quiet. I sent cards. He looked at the 8 settings. I made the food. Gary's certainty, which was the whole instrument of his operation, did the thing that certainty does when it meets the specific weight of a thing someone has been holding for a long time and has finally set on the table. It paused. Dario spoke in the even, factual register of a man who has been sitting at this table for 2 hours and has no investment in the outcome except what is true. He said that Walt had shown him the birthday cards he had sent. He said that Walt had described Gary's message to Karen, the one about wanting quiet, in specific terms that suggested the message had not originated with Walt. He said that he was not an attorney and could not advise Walt on anything legal, but that he knew a veterans advocacy organization that helped elderly veterans navigate exactly these kinds of family situations, and that he was going to give Walt the number before he left. He said all of this calmly, without raising his voice, with the specific economy of a man who says what needs to be said and nothing more. Gary said something about family matters and appropriate channels. Teddy had not moved. The continuous sound from his chest had not stopped. Gary looked at the dog with the expression of a man who has realized somewhat late that the room he walked into was not the room he had anticipated. He left 10 minutes later without Walt. The fleece vest crossed the parking lot and the white Silverado pulled out onto Route 30. Teddy walked back to Walt's feet and lay down. Walt looked at the table. He looked at the 7 settings. He looked at Pearl's chair at the end of the table, which had a small birthday card leaning against the water glass, a card Walt had put there this morning, the way he always put a card there, addressed in his handwriting to a name that was no longer at the table, but that he had never stopped setting a place for. He said, "She would have liked you." Dario said, "Which one?" Walt said, "Both of them." He looked at Teddy, the dog especially. The photograph stayed on the Galleon community page for weeks. It produced a specific kind of response that photographs of simple human acts sometimes produce. People tagging other people. People typing the names of people they were thinking of, people saying things they had been meaning to say to someone, and using the photograph as the reason to say them. Donna printed it and put it on the wall by the register, which was where Galloway's put the things that belonged to the diner permanently. Walt's daughter, Karen, called him the following Sunday. It was the first call in 14 months. She called because the photograph had reached her through a friend of a friend, and because what she saw in it, her father at a birthday table with 8 settings and 1 Marine and a dog, told her something that Gary had been keeping from reaching her for 3 years, which was the specific shape of her father's loneliness, which she had been told was contentment. They talked for an hour. Walt did not say what Gary had done. He said that he had had a good birthday and that there had been enough food and that the cake had turned out close. Karen said she was going to come at Christmas. Walt said he would make Pearl's recipe for the sugar cookies. Karen said she remembered those cookies. Gary's suggestion about the house was not raised. It was not raised at Christmas either. It was set aside in the way that certain things get set aside when the person doing the proposing understands that the ground is shifted. Dario drove back to base with a piece of yellow cake in the passenger seat, wrapped in a paper napkin by Donna, and called his father from the highway. His father answered on the second ring, which was how his father always answered, and his voice was slightly different from before the stroke, a fraction slower, a fraction more deliberate. But it was his father's voice. And Dario drove north through Ohio with the November light going and talked to his father for 40 miles about nothing of consequence, which was everything of consequence. Walt's birthday the following year had 11 people at the table. Karen was there. Dan came from Columbus. 2 of the grandchildren drove. Donna made a reservation for the large room in the back without being asked. The yellow cake had 11 candles and was made from Pearl's recipe exact now. Walt had made it 6 more times over the year and had gotten it right, or as right as it was going to be, which was close enough that Karen tasted it and was quiet for a moment and then said, "Mom," just that word. Walt had nodded. He had known. Dario sent a card. It arrived on time. It said, "Happy birthday. I hope there's cake." There was. What Dario Cruz did on a November afternoon in Galleon, Ohio, was not complicated in the way we sometimes make these things complicated. He walked into a diner and his dog sat down at an old man's birthday table, and he pulled up a chair, and he stayed. He had the same afternoon as every other driver on Route 30. He stopped because his dog stopped first, and he trusted his dog and the rest followed. He pulled up the chair. That was the whole of it. This story is for every person who set a table and watched the door, for everyone who made the food and lit the candle and waited, and for anyone who has been the person at the door, on the other side. It's not too late to walk through it. Is there someone in your life whose birthday table you haven't sat at in too long? A parent, a neighbor, someone you've been meaning to call? Tell me about them in the comments. I read everyone, and every story on this channel is about choosing not to look away. If that means something to you, subscribe, so you're here for the next one. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.